I think it's interesting thinking about these relationships between these countries, right? You always want to think about the worst case scenario because I think a lot of these worst case scenarios have been played out on the news. I don't think this will happen, as you mentioned. I am going to list some of these, but I think there's a difference between TV politics, what we hear, and what happens in the closed backdoor room of how these deals actually go down. But some worst case scenarios here. Number one, a permanent rupture in the US European alliance could be national suicide. It could trigger major fissures and ruptures in NATO at its core. The EU represents America's largest trade relationship. Just last week, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, he called for the EU to activate a very potent and powerful trade weapon called the anti-coercion measure. If used, it could restrict US access to the EU market, potentially blocking US banks from EU procurement. It could target US tech giants, really cripple a lot of US exports to the EU. Now, this has never been used before, but it has been on the table. Along those lines, within the NATO relationship, we would have to consider the possibility of closing many of our US military bases on the European continent. Ramstein base in Germany, Viano in Italy, Lakenheath in the UK. This would limit the US's ability to project their power throughout the world, especially into the Middle East and Africa and basically the entire global infrastructure. We would also create dollar vulnerability. Europe could call in more US debt, dump their dollar reserves, sending the value of our currency into this death spiral. And the US economy, which relies on the dollar being the global reserve currency, could collapse. So that's number one, right? That's just fissures in NATO. But number two, could possibly, in a doomsday scenario, drive Europe into the hands of China, right? Like if your favorite restaurant closes, you go and find another favorite restaurant, right? The US already sees Europe with distrust, right? There's been obviously this blockade in purchasing Greenland now. If this is reciprocated, right, could European nations that already have ties with Beijing fall into their arms? Could Germany and France and others conclude that maybe strategic autonomy means colluding more with Beijing and diversifying away from the US? There's a risk there, right? We want our allies to be our friends and not become our enemies. Thirdly, all this empowers Russia and China. Vijay, you alluded to this, right? This legitimizes what Russia and China are doing in their own global strategy. Every argument Putin has made about Crimea or Ukraine, or every argument that China now makes about Taiwan, all of these become easier to justify when Washington now abandons their own rules and seeks Greenland. And so they could say the Americans took Greenland, and so international borders are negotiable by force, right? If America can do it, why can't we? And so we run these three major risks, right? Major fissures within NATO and Europe, driving Europe towards China, and empowering Russia and China to pursue their own aggressive global strategy. But looking at all of this, right, are there better alternatives to accomplishing US strategic goals instead of tariffs? Like if you and I had an ear at the White House tomorrow, or maybe, had a desk at the State Department with Marco Rubio, what would we say? What could we suggest as better alternatives?
The question becomes like, so I'll give you a list of maybe like you could argue they're better alternatives, right? The issue is, and I think this is a problem, it's not that they have not been explored. I can't imagine they have not been explored through our diplomatic channels. It's that we have not been able to land at a place where we feel comfortable with the overall security of the US and the broader Western Hemisphere.